In today's episode of Payments Agenda, we have my guest is Keren Aviasaf from Worx, and we will be talking about importance of, in general, data. Also, we'll cover payment data. Karen, can you tell me a little bit more how you come up with the idea about Worx, and what is the biggest challenges of online businesses and gaming operators in relation with data?
Okay, sure. So thank you for having me here, Dan.
It's a pleasure.
I'm really happy to join you at this podcast. And first I would say that for the past 20 years I was working in payment processing and financial services, and I was working for acquirers and for large e-commerce merchants, as well as for 888.com, which is a large gaming operator. And I'm a fintech entrepreneur, and I work a lot with startups, with SMBs, with enterprises. So I think I have a very wide view of the market and the pain points. And I think that one of the biggest pain points is actually the data, but not so much the data itself as what you do with this data, because there's not enough expertise, there's not enough time, there's always lack of resources, whether technical or operational. So this is why a lot of the companies tend to neglect this part of the business. And it's very sad because they can do a lot more revenues by focusing at the data, and I'll explain in a minute. So I think the most challenging parts of a gaming experience today, coming from the merchant side, is actually the lack of data. A lot of times there's a lot of data out there because we are processing many transactions, we are working on many customers, so we have a lot of dimensions and information. But a lot of times the information is actually being saved on the side of the payment provider and not being transferred properly to the merchants, as you know yourself with your platform. So the merchants don't have one source of truth. And there are different stakeholders in the organization, like we have the CFO or the COO or the chief product, and everyone are looking not on the same data. So naturally they reach different conclusions on their performance. So this is, I think, number one challenge. It has been that for the past, 10 to 20 years, that people are looking at different data and then they cannot really decide what's the next best step for them in order to increase their revenues. That's number one. Number two, I think that it's around misuse of data. Like there isn't enough expertise in understanding the payment trends, the correct KPIs that you should put in order to measure it. And I'm not talking about conversion. Like when we look at payments, we measure other things. And then there's not enough people in the world still today that actually knows how to optimize transaction, how to optimize processing fees, and how to handle chargebacks properly within the compliance of Visa and MasterCard. And
Totally
that's
agree.
The second challenge.
As I understand the problem is that there are a lot of stakeholders, and they're not looking at the same data simultaneously. But also, I believe in every organization, especially in the big organizations, the problem is to collect the data, is to harmonize the data. So is to put it in one single source so that all the stakeholders will have access or can use this data. And how we can handle this, and what is your experience?
Absolutely. Like it's funny, but today we see enterprises working with Excel files. So I'm a fan of Excel, like I love it, it's a great software. But eventually if you try to manage millions of transactions and get, conclusions over that, I think Excel will not be the best
At least this is not a database, right?
Yeah, it's not like the database itself. Sometimes they use, SQL or other tools to explore the data. But it's very hard for merchants today, because if you work with one processor, let's say you have one banking provider that you work with, okay, you can use their portal and then get the data and then use their dashboards and you reach some conclusions. But when you have a lot of traffic, naturally you want to work with a few banking partners and a few payment solution providers. You have the credit cards, you have wallets, you have alternative payment solutions, and you need to have all this data like normalized and centralized in one place. So I think today we have a very good platforms like payment orchestrators, payment gateways, or systems that actually work on the data itself, on monitoring and alerting systems, and they can group all these nice partners that you work with and you process with, and then you can see all the transactions in one space. You can see all the customers, you can see all the fees, and then you can actually process and reach conclusions. But you have to have people like working on these systems, because it's not something that the system can do by itself most of the time. We don't see a lot of use of AI still today in payments. We just see like the start points of using that in payments data. So you have to have someone that is analyzing the data, monitoring the numbers, and getting the conclusions to the management.
True. What I have heard so far, and I believe there are many companies focusing on using, I would say, AI technologies, not really AI, but machine learning or deep learning technologies in order to analyze the data for clusterization, for pattern recognition, and so on. But they are mainly in detecting fraud, statistical fraud, like Maximise, for example.
Right. You're right. Like for the risk management and fraud mitigation, we have tools for many, many years. So we have Maximise, and we have other tools like Count and what used to be CyberSource, and a lot of other systems which we can use to do the onboarding of a customer, and then the monitoring, like the day-to-day monitoring, and to see that everything is good and we don't get a lot of chargebacks. So that use case is already very explainable. Like companies use that. But I think that we can use that for revenues, because if we take the clustering, the profiling, and the predictive modeling to a place where we focus on the transactions, and we want to make sure that each transaction that we process will be accepted, and we want to send it to the provider that we pay much less fees, then you see that we are building a kind of triangle that I usually call it, between the fees, which we want to make lower, the acceptance rate should be higher, and the chargeback rate should be lower. So if we take like a very smart AI engine or very smart data scientist that can actually build proper models, we can reach optimum in our revenues. So the scope is much higher than just risk management.
Yeah, okay. So machines are now, helping people, or maybe sometimes there's a...
Helping or not, depends.
Yes, it depends, right? I think that AI is very, very efficient in this field. So it looks like AI routing is like a tool that's most probably will be a feature for, very common in any orchestrator very soon, or maybe some of them already have it. This is really focus what previously were not available for I would say, business owners. I think it's nobody, when it comes to payment data, nobody talk about marketing. I hear first time in my life that somebody is talking about payment data is the source for marketing and for marketing decisions, not only for, I don't know, like revenue growth, right, or revenue optimization, but it's for marketing decision. Can you elaborate a little bit about
absolutely. You can use payments data in order to engage the customers. You can use it in order to have them a more coherent experience when they pay with your platform, when they go to the payment pages or the cashier. And I'll explain, it happens on the beginning of the funnel, when you try to market for certain populations. So if you check the population that you already have in your data, you know which campaigns are better, because you can see if you have paying customers at the end of it, and after 3 months, if they didn't do any chargeback or refund, then you know that this campaign was really good. So this is how you use the payment data in order to pick the best campaigns, in order to give the best offers to the customers, because then you can actually compare the content that they have been seeing when they saw the banners or when they saw the different marketing channels, and how eventually they managed to pay. What solution did they pick? Are they credit card users? Do they have a credit card or debit card? What's their financial situation? Do you want more from these users or not? Do you want more prepaid users or not? It really depends on how you manage the business. Do you have recurring opportunities in some of the models? Then there is a lot of data in the payments that can actually, you can take for the first line of the marketing and have a better offer to engage customers even before they hear about you. So that's number one. Number two is for users that were already paying and they're coming back. And sometimes they use the web, sometimes they use mobile, sometimes they will call the call center. If you have all their payment history and you can tell them that they can, deposit with the best solution that they like, and it's not the best one for you as a merchant sometimes, but this is the payment solution that they will pick in order to put money inside your, cashier. So this is another use that we recommend to do.
I clearly understand that we have like a lot of automation nowadays with AI, and on the same time, data is well prepared and harmonized using the orchestrator or gateways. So some companies are really cool in unifying the data coming from disparate sources within the organization as well, to centralize this. So, okay, if we solve first problem with the data, second problem with the tools, I believe there is a third problem, is the people. So,
yeah.
So you mentioned in the beginning of our conversation that unfortunately there is not that much professionals who can, I would say, understand and read the data. And what do you see the ways how it can be solved?
Well, I think that some of the companies have tried to, to train, and we also did that within our advisory company, within Payments OP. We have been trying to train a lot of people with the payment knowledge. But the fact is that this world is very dynamic and there are a lot of changes. So you have to know a lot of details in order to actually navigate between the different providers, the different solutions, the different risk mitigation tools, and there's a lot of information that you actually need to process as a human being in order to, to help your organization to reach the best performance. But today, once we have a lot of platforms like the orchestrators, which have all the data inside, and then we put some AI on that and some maybe, machine learning, then I think we can actually build an automated payment manager or risk manager, which will take all decisions as where if they were human. This is what we are trying to do within Worx, to take the technology, to take the expertise, and to combine them together in a technological tool that can actually work as a person and take the operational decisions on a day-to-day basis. For SMBs, which cannot really, offer themselves to hire a payment manager or cannot really find one.
Yeah, despite the fact that it sounds
like
very,
science
very
fiction.
Science fiction, it's quite scary.
Yeah, Matrix is here.
Yeah, true. So this is like automated decision-making process. So it's and I believe it Worx. You're doing this, automation.
Yes.
And how you come up with this idea is that to remove manual work, manual human decision-making on the payments.
I think it came up for me like after 10 years of doing advisory with my team to a lot of online merchants and banks and e-wallets and issuers, and we have been seeing that the problems are the same, whether you are a startup with 3 people or an enterprise with 800 people. Like, it's always the same. You always want to, to increase the acceptance rate. Usually when you come to organization, they don't know what the acceptance rate is. And when I talk about it, I mean like out of 100 transactions that you have been processing, how much were succeeded? Like, is it 30%? Is it 50%? Is it 80%? A lot of the organization don't know that, and they lose a lot of money on the way. So first thing, we realized that everyone are kind of clueless about this space of how to measure payments, how to make it more successful. And the second thing was that we saw that there's always a bottleneck within the technical resources space, because they're always busy with the next products, with the next features, with the next brand. So they're working on that, and the payments is kind of neglected because it's not so sexy. to program payments.
I totally agree with that, but there are some industries where, understanding of payments is quite high. I mean, so for instance, gambling or betting companies there, I believe in understanding of payments is very close to the payments industry.
It is. It grew there. This is where it started.
Yeah, and I will see a lot of people starting in payments and then continue in a gambling operator or platform. I had a conversation with a manager in an e-commerce company, and we talked about how orchestration can help us to maximize conversion. But the problem is that they have a very cool conversion, with two big brands, two acquirers is about 96, 95.
Oh, that's amazing.
So that's amazing, right? Yes. The problem is quite tough to hire if you have that number. Their intention is to start looking into this. Was actually not the acceptance rate.
Not the acceptance rate. So what was bothering them?
Yeah, so they target the global market, and as the precondition is to sell their services and products, mainly services, is to provide relevant payment option to the market. So they cannot start, for example, to market their product before they find a partner who will process them.
Will process the funds.
Yes. So my question is why I tell you this, because it's something that will be in the future that does not exist. There is no data for that. And how it works in this case? What will be the?
Well, this is more into the localization space, and when you say 96% approval rate, I'm sure it's not a worldwide acceptance rate.
Totally true.
If you check Europe, if you check maybe the US or the mainstream markets, then you can reach higher numbers. But when we talk about global merchants who is working worldwide with many markets, and as you said, before entering into a specific market, they have to be sure that they can collect funds. So some of the developing countries use a lot of cash, or they use a lot of prepaid solutions or local solutions that cannot really be processed online if you don't find the correct partner to work with. So this is not a question of payments data, because as you said, we don't have any history. That's a totally new payment solution. But it is kind of a strategic understanding that before you go to reach to a new market, you have to make sure that you can collect money. So you have to find local partners that are willing to process it with you. You have to find a solution that online gamblers will like and will use it. Because if they use it for their day-to-day use, if they pay electricity with that or any other bill, then naturally they will also use it online. And the nice thing about people who gamble and are open to do that online is that according to a very recent research, we discovered that 73% of the depositors are even trying more than 3 times to deposit. So they have high motivation to deposit. The only thing that you as an operator should do is to bring them the correct payment solutions that they can use.
They're much more motivated, but it's not relevant for every online business.
Right.
Sometimes it's if you need to pay like $9.99 for subscription. If you fail 1 or 2 times.
Yeah, you'll just go to another website or another service, right? You will ditch the checkout page immediately, because we have no patience. If it doesn't happen within 2 to 3 seconds, then we go elsewhere. So this is the trick. If you have a very modular and dynamic payment page and checkout experience for the customer, then you can make sure that he will not leave this space before he pays.
Even success rates, there are in a lot of different success rates on a checkout, on a card form, on acquirer side, and they are always different.
Always different, because you have kind of a mini funnel between the space where the customer enters the payment page until he reaches a transaction that is being processed within the acquirer. So there's a few parameters there that you can measure if we come back to the payments data. So the first one is to see that he actually managed to enter the page and the page was loaded. Sometimes there's a technical issue and you cannot create a session for the user, the page is not loaded, and then he have to, to leave or retry. So you have to start, measuring this part from this point on. And then you have a lot of risk management rules. Sometimes the amount is too high and it gets blocked due to deposit limits. Sometimes it's his 5th try and then you will block him or the processor will block him. So we have the risk management by the merchant, we have the risk management by the processor, then we have risk management by the acquirer. So not all the transactions that are coming into your payment page are actually being sent to the issuer, which is the one that actually approves or declines the transaction. So if you measure all these steps, then you can see your funnel, like how many eventually from 100 transactions were sent to the acquirer, and the acquirer actually moved them through the issuer via the Visa and MasterCard network or via other solution providers. And then you have the proper numbers for your success rate. And you can also check all the decline codes. As you said, we have a lot of them. They're categorized differently from each one of the acquirers. Different codes, different numbering, different interpretations. So if you measure them and you try to understand their meaning, then you know that this is a stolen card, so you better not process this customer and block it. But this is insufficient funds, so maybe we can offer a coupon or a discount or installments or maybe a loan if it's not gambling. So then we can save this transaction and allow the customer to continue and purchase something within our platform. So there's a lot of things that you can do to allow the customer to eventually become yours.
So when you talk about this kind of sales funnel, so it's, I believe a lot of sales guys or marketers, so they understand that they see this real funnel, right? So then they are out starting engaging with or reaching new clients, and then they sign a contract, or finally someone made a purchase. But there is a small funnel at the end, right? And the checkout.
The payment funnel.
The payment funnel. So is it possible to clearly see this funnel within your system and to understand, to better understand it for decision-making process?
Yeah, it was actually our intention to allow, merchants to see this funnel and to understand the drop. When they get into our dashboard, they should see like how many successful sessions they had in each one of the stages, and then to realize how many transactions were eventually good ones and how many transactions failed even before trying to, to process them. But it requires a lot of cooperation from the merchant side, because everything is kind of happening on the website or on the mobile app, and you have to collect all this data, which they are sometimes not aware of that. Like they do not put the data in any place that you can actually call a database. So you have to first discuss this with them and normalize the data and take the data into your system in order for you to actually analyze it. I think some of the orchestrators, they allow you to enrich the data and to send some metadata inside the transaction, and then you can give them some sense of how this funnel actually operates on the day-to-day level.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Yep.
It's interesting. I have an interesting question for you. So you just told me that you have to have access to the data, and a client has to collect the data, and also maybe there are some joint efforts as to find the ways how to harmonize the data. But how you choose the client, or how the client chooses you? So I believe the key to success is to have a collaboration, and it's in my personal experience, sometimes it's a problem. Is that both organizations may be on some high level, understand the importance of the collaboration, but actually some organizations are not ready. I mean, like technology-wise, knowledge-wise, different aspects-wise. What is your, the criteria? Do you accept this client or not accept this client, and how you believe in success in this project?
Well, I think that's an interesting question, because there's always, a conflict between how many customers you want to take and how many of them you want to stop. Because you want to have as much customers as possible, but you want to have the correct customers and the right ones that are coming not to abuse the system and not to try to, to gain more than you want to give them. Specifically in the gaming space, we see a lot of trends that are not very good to the merchant, and he should actually protect itself from abusers, from gamers that are not coming for the gaming experience but are trying to get more money than they should. So it's always a question where, how do you like to do that? Do you want to just put everyone inside, like accept everyone, all customers, and then analyze their data and see who is a good profile, who is not a good profile, then you can block them? Mm-hmm. Or do you want to be more cautious, like more risk averse? So you want to check them before they process the funds, which is actually the cheapest way. Prevention is the cheapest. Mitigation is the most expensive. So you can stop a lot of customers, but then maybe the revenues will fall because you might have a large percentage of false positive. Because, it's statistics. We don't really know the customers. We don't see them. They don't come physically to our shop. We just get their data, like the name, the address, the card number, and then we need to take a decision. Is it a good customer or not a good customer? Is it worthy for me to get him or not? Is he going to be troublemaker or not? We don't know. Sure. We just see the customer, we see the entity. We don't know even if it's a real entity and a real person or just a collection of data that someone, scrambled and put inside our website. So we should be very careful. I believe specifically that's my agenda. This is the way that I work with our customers. We work according to the traffic light methodology. Mm-hmm. So it means that we have red customers or red transactions, which we immediately block, and we try to do that pre-processing, like before they even reach to the web cashier. And then we have the orange ones that are some of the information is not really good, but we're not sure. So we will move them for manual review, and someone will gather more information and decide whether to accept them or not. And then we have the green lights, which look fabulous, and we just want them to to go inside and start playing and start purchasing.
Yeah, but to do so, you need to process a lot of personal data.
Yes.
Alongside with payment data, with numbers and everything. But what about privacy? Because it's very fragmented experience as well. I mean, like there are different regulations. At least in Europe, there is a GDPR regulation, and in United States, the most important thing is California law, right?
Yeah.
And another things in our jurisdictions, they have like similar frameworks.
Absolutely. I think that's a very blessed regulation, by the way. I know that most of the people will not think that it's a good thing to have a lot of regulation and compliance and a lot of things that you should do, because everything eventually comes to the technology space and you have to implement a lot of stuff. But I think that as persons, we want our information to be secure. We want everything that a merchant knows about us to be saved properly. And luckily for us, we have the GDPR, we have the privacy rules, and we have a lot of guidelines how to actually operate them inside the organization. So I think first step is to have transparency for the merchant in front of his clients. Then we come inside, we see the T's and C's, and then we know which data the merchant actually collects on us. So nobody reads it besides me, but you can have it in the terms of use, and you can see which one of the data fields is actually being collected. And then you know how you can ask the merchant to delete everything. So you have the right to be deleted. You have the right to stop being a client of this merchant, and then to have him just delete all the data. So I think this is why it's good, because the regulation can actually leverage the business, leverage the customer, and leverage the experience. And when you trust the merchant, you want to work more with them. And for business purposes, the regulation actually declares that if you have a business use of saving the data, then you can save it. You don't have to delete it. You don't have to skip data that you need in order to have a better performance. if it's for risk management matters, if it's for revenue management or anything else, and you can prove that you use the data properly, you save it properly, you keep it, then that's not like a problem for the operator. You know, we have been working with the PCI requirements for years now. So it's not really different than the PCI requirements that handle only transactions. Now we handle all the private and sensitive data.
So I believe in the future when it will be like a common framework for everything to handle, whatever the data. So sometimes personal data is of great importance alongside this sensitive card data, for example, for PCI standard. Totally agree. So I wish to ask you one question I'm regularly asked, and this is about the execution of rights under GDPR. If one of the user will ask to delete the data, so how we can keep the data consistent, because we cannot delete the payment data, right? So because it should be registered in your books. It's definitely registered in a lot of third parties you're using for card processing, APMs, whatever. I mean, like, how we can do that? How you can do that?
Well, it requires technology, as everything in our space. So you have to have the correct encryption models. You have to have the correct database and the servers and everything around that. I'm not getting into this space into too many details. But I think that some parts of the informations are not private and you can mask them, and other parts are private. So if we have the personal name and the address, these are very private. It's considered to be a PII, so you have to be able to delete it. But then you can mask it with something like very encrypted that is not combined together unless you have the ability to combine them, and then you save the details in different spaces. So we have part of the transaction details in one space, other details in another space, and then everything should be well handled. But today I think there is a lot of security people that actually knows how to do that, and some of the PCI token vaults offer a lot of tools to handle privacy as well. And some of the orchestrators offer the token vaults like embedded within the orchestration itself. So there are a lot of tools. You just need to study it and to find a good solution. Then you can protect the customer's data.
Yeah,
it is complex. It is very complex. But everything we do in payments is complex. True. And everything we do online is complex. And everything we do in gaming is complex, right? Because if it was simple and easy, we would have get bored. So we have to crack our mind, how to work better, and we have to understand that there are different users within the merchants. We have the customer support, and we have the product people, we have the finance teams, and each one of the users have different requirements from the data and should be exposed to different parts of the data. It's not just for everyone. So we need to understand who is the person that actually needs to see everything, and only for them to expose the part that they need. And for, I don't know, for customer success or for VAP support or for anyone like that, we don't really need to present all the data. We can, present part of the data and allow them still to do the day-to-day work if they like to. But you have to have permissions, you have to have different accesses, you have to invest in, higher technology, you have to bring security experts, you have to do all that in order to work properly, and that's a lot. That's a lot
totally
for organization.
For me, it sounds like tons of work is to provide all the tools and to comply with all the rules and regulations, and at the same time is to provide like flexibility for clients, because it's also for me, system sounds that it has to be it should be very adaptable to different types of data or sources and so on.
Well, I always say that payment processing is a commodity. Like almost any platform can offer that. However, the payment operation is not a commodity; it's an expertise. So if you want to be, best in that area, and this is why we actually built Worx, because we figured that it's like channel management for payments, which should include inside everything regarding compliance and regulation and security. And then you have one place which is a very transparent box that you can see what's happening inside, but you don't touch it. So the merchant can actually outsource everything that he needs regarding payments to one space, and not have the constant need to work on that and to have resources invented in that.
Yeah, totally so cool idea.
Yeah, that was.
I wish you great success.
Yeah, we still need to develop it, but
but this is
working on that.
Yeah, but this is it says the beginning of the road. So
yeah, that's the beginning.
Yeah, it's the beginning.
That's the vision.
Thank you so much for being here, for your time today, and I hope to see you in some next episodes when we will talk about the developments in your project and career. And I hope so we can discuss some stories about like actual customer cases, how they interact with the product, and so on. So
yeah, of course, Dan, I love it. Thank you so much. I had a good time.
Thank you.